Chapter 2. England in the modern UK. In the early 1900s, the UK was one of the most powerful countries in the world, with a big empire. The Industrial Revolution was changing many people's lives, and steamships and cars were widely used for the first time.
Industrial Revolution, 18th to 19th century. The economic developments of the 1800s saw the development of agrarian and handicraft economies in Europe and America transform into industrial urbanized ones. The term to describe this phenomenon would be known as the Industrial Revolution, and was first used by French writers but made popular by English economic historian Arnold Toynbee. The Industrial Revolution was underpinned by the Agricultural Revolution. From the mid-18th century to the mid-19th century, agricultural production increased significantly. The huge increase in food output supported the expansion and sustained a large population and boosted trade. The increased use of machines over human or animal power in farming also meant that less farm workers were needed, and they could leave the land to industrial towns. Better metals and richer fuel also contributed to industrialization by creating the steam engine, an integral machine to industrialization which powered factories, locomotives and ships. The new steam engines used coal and iron, both in their construction and as fuel, increasing demand for these resources. Roads, canals and railways changed Britain dramatically, connecting Britain and allowing goods to be sent over long distances. Visually, the revolution was clear in the new industrial towns, with smoking factories dominating the skyline. The cities were horrible to live in, overcrowded and dirty with dangerous conditions in the factories and strict rules and punishments. The Industrial Revolution saw mechanization in factories of the textile industry, which was previously manufactured in the home, creating the term cottage industry. Now, production could be increased on a large scale because of new inventions such as the spinning mule and the power loom. The iron industry developed with Henry Bessemer's inexpensive process for mass-producing steel. Iron and steel were key materials for constructing the tools and machinery, steam engines, and ships needed for the industrial progress. Industrial labor opportunities drew people to the cities from the countryside, to such an extent that in 1750 only 15% of the population of Britain lived in towns. By 1850, over 50% of the entire population of Great Britain lived in either a town or a city, and by 1900 it was 85%. London had 4.5 million people, Glasgow 760,000, Liverpool 685,000, and Manchester and Birmingham 500,000. Great Britain was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution and was the only mature industrial economy for a long time. Historians have speculated that this was because, as an island, there was relative peace and stability for Britain compared to mainland Europe. Rather than spending on a large defensive standing army, capital could be spent on other ventures, and there was confidence for investors. Native resources were also abundant and readily available for initial technological developments and inventions. Engineers and inventors were also respected and encouraged in British society and were backed by wealthy patrons. A powerful navy and an empire bringing in vast wealth from its colonies also contributed to the catalyst for industrialization before others. Nevertheless, Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium and the United States soon emulated Britain's industrial change, and by 1900, Britain would no longer be at the top, with the United States as the world's leading industrial nation in the 20th century.
Rich people lived very well, with beautiful houses and servants, but poor people had few clothes and little to eat, and their children were often ill. Life was difficult for women in the UK at this time too. People expected women to stay at home with their families, and they could not get well-paid jobs. It was very difficult for women to go to university, and they could not vote. In 1903, a group of women called the Suffragettes, led by Emmeline Pankhurst, organised meetings and marches, asking for Parliament to give women the vote. In 1914, the UK and its allies France and Russia went to war with Germany and Austria-Hungary.
What caused the devastating First World War? You may be aware of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This was, in fact, the trigger which set off the war from a number of underlying causes. These were militarism, alliances, imperialism and nationalism. Militarism created an arms race out of competition and fear of neighbouring nations. Germany tried to compete in a naval race with Britain, building more and more ships. Alliances were created to check the balance of power between nations. In 1882, Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy formed the Triple Alliance. France, Britain and Russia reacted in 1907 by creating the Triple Entente. Imperialism caused another type of competition and disagreement. The British and French empires made Germany jealous as it tried to colonize parts of Africa. Nationalism created the feeling that countries were better than others and promoted the anti-Austro-Hungarian sentiments in Serbia. 7 young Bosnian Serbs, who were part of the nationalist Black Hand, planned to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary.
The Gallipoli Campaign, 1915 to 1916. World War I. By 1915, the war on the Western Front had fallen into a stalemate. The Allied powers fighting in Belgium and France were considering opening a new front. In January 1915, Grand Duke Nicholas of Russia had appealed to Britain for assistance against the Ottoman Empire, a member of the Central Powers which had invaded the Caucasus. A naval expedition was launched by the Allies to capture the Dardanelles Straits, a passage that connects the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara in northwestern Turkey, and beyond that, the Black Sea. If they were successful in their goal, the Allies could link up supply routes with Russia and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Furthermore, as First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill proposed opening another front would dilute the German forces as they supported the depleting Ottoman Turkish army. British Admiralty Winston Churchill pushed for a naval attack on the Dardanelles with a bombardment by British and French battleships on February the 19th, 1915, and resumed on the 25th because of bad weather. The Ottomans had placed mines in the water and the minesweepers had failed to detect many of them. The British also sent Royal Marines ashore to sabotage Ottoman artillery. On March the 18th, Allied battleships entered the straits. Fire from the Turks and undetected mines sank 3 of the ships and damaged 3 others. This naval assault could not work because the Turkish guns needed to be silenced, and so did the minefields, which was impossible to do at the same time. The naval ships were also mainly obsolete warships, unsuitable for action. After this failed naval attack, a full-scale amphibious beach assault would begin on the Gallipoli Peninsula. General Ian Hamilton was commander and had assembled 77 ships and 75,000 men. However, he lacked specialist landing craft. Under his command were British forces, ANZAC, standing for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, and lastly, French troops. The landing started on April 25th. The Allies suffered heavy casualties, establishing the beachheads of Cape Helles and Anzac Cove on the Aegean coast. The Anzac forces had landed a little north of the intended landing site of Gaba Tepe at a cove instead. The Gaba Tepe landings would become known as the Anzac Cove Landings, in honour of the Australian and New Zealand troops who fought valiantly against the determined Ottoman Turkish defenders. After the landing, the Allies could not progress as trench warfare quickly formed like it had done on the Western Front. The summer heat and the dysentery epidemic were unbearable, and swarms of flies hung around corpses. Hamilton ordered an attack on Suvla Bay in August, involving the landing of 63,000 Allied troops. They were to link up with Anzacs at Anzac Cove and break the stalemate. But indecision meant that the Ottoman Empire would reinforce the position, and by August 10th, an attack led by Mustafa Kemal recaptured Suvla Bay. Allied casualties increased and the stalemate continued. Reinforcements were lacking. It was time for evacuation. The order to evacuate the Allied troops was given on the 7th of December, with the last troops leaving Suvla Bay and Anzac Cove before dawn on the 20th of December 1915. The last troops left Cape Helles on January the 9th, 1916, and the evacuation was a success with no casualties. The Gallipoli campaign was a disaster for the Allies, who suffered more than 250,000 casualties, while on the Ottoman side, they also had an estimated 250,000 casualties. Gallipoli has become a defining moment in the history of both Australia and New Zealand, and has been recognised as their baptism of fire and a key event to their emergence as independent nations. In Turkey, the battle was seen as a significant event in the foundation of modern Turkey, and a final victorious defence before the end of the Ottoman Empire.
Many young men chose to fight. They believed the war would be very short, but it went on for 4 years, and nearly 750,000 soldiers from the UK were killed.
The Gallipoli Campaign, 1915 to 1916. World War I. By 1915, the war on the Western Front had fallen into a stalemate. The Allied powers fighting in Belgium and France were considering opening a new front. In January 1915, Grand Duke Nicholas of Russia had appealed to Britain for assistance against the Ottoman Empire, a member of the Central Powers which had invaded the Caucasus. A naval expedition was launched by the Allies to capture the Dardanelles Straits, a passage that connects the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara in northwestern Turkey, and beyond that, the Black Sea. If they were successful in their goal, the Allies could link up supply routes with Russia and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Furthermore, as First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill proposed opening another front would dilute the German forces as they supported the depleting Ottoman Turkish army. British Admiralty Winston Churchill pushed for a naval attack on the Dardanelles with a bombardment by British and French battleships on February the 19th, 1915, and resumed on the 25th because of bad weather. The Ottomans had placed mines in the water, and the minesweepers had failed to detect many of them. The British also sent Royal Marines ashore to sabotage Ottoman artillery. On March the 18th, Allied battleships entered the straits. Fire from the Turks and undetected mines sank 3 of the ships and damaged 3 others. This naval assault could not work because the Turkish guns needed to be silenced, and so did the minefields, which was impossible to do at the same time. The naval ships were also mainly obsolete warships, unsuitable for action. After this failed naval attack, a full-scale amphibious beach assault would begin on the Gallipoli Peninsula. General Ian Hamilton was commander and had assembled 77 ships and 75,000 men. However, he lacked specialist landing craft. Under his command were British forces, Anzac, standing for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, and lastly, French troops. The landing started on April 25th. The Allies suffered heavy casualties, establishing the beachheads of Cape Helles and Anzac Cove on the Aegean coast. The Anzac forces had landed a little north of the intended landing site of Gaba Tepe at a cove instead. The Gaba Tepe landings would become known as the Anzac Cove Landings, in honour of the Australian and New Zealand troops who fought valiantly against the determined Ottoman Turkish defenders. After the landing, the Allies could not progress as trench warfare quickly formed like it had done on the Western Front. The summer heat and the dysentery epidemic were unbearable, and swarms of flies hung around corpses. Hamilton ordered an attack on Suvla Bay in August, involving the landing of 63,000 Allied troops. They were to link up with Anzacs at Anzac Cove and break the stalemate. But indecision meant that the Ottoman Empire would reinforce the position, and by August 10th, an attack led by Mustafa Kemal recaptured Suvla Bay. Allied casualties increased and the stalemate continued. Reinforcements were lacking. It was time for evacuation. The order to evacuate the Allied troops was given on the 7th of December, with the last troops leaving Suvla Bay and Anzac Cove before dawn on the 20th of December 1915. The last troops left Cape Helles on January the 9th, 1916, and the evacuation was a success with no casualties. The Gallipoli campaign was a disaster for the Allies, who suffered more than 250,000 casualties. While on the Ottoman side, they also had an estimated 250,000 casualties. Gallipoli has become a defining moment in the history of both Australia and New Zealand, and has been recognised as their baptism of fire and a key event to their emergence as independent nations. In Turkey, the battle was seen as a significant event in the foundation of modern Turkey, and a final victorious defence before the end of the Ottoman Empire.
While the men were fighting, women had to do the men's jobs at home. Women soon showed that they could work in farming, factories, and even in the coal industry. After helping their country to win the First World War, workers and women in England wanted better lives. Men got their jobs at home back from the women, so most women were no longer working. But in 1918, women over 30 were given the vote for the first time. From 1929, women, like men, could vote from the age of 21. A new political party for working people, the Labour Party, became important in politics at this time, and in 1926, 500,000 workers went on strike to fight against low pay and long working hours. But life became even more difficult for workers in 1929, when the world went into an economic depression. Prices fell, there was less trade, and many shops and factories closed. By 1931, nearly 3 million people in the UK had lost their jobs. The First World War was fought mainly in battles on fields in France, but almost everyone in the UK had a difficult life because of the Second World War, 1939 to 45. Many children had to leave their homes and go to live in the countryside. This was because at the end of 1940 and the beginning of 1941, the Germans dropped many bombs on London and other cities. This was called the Blitz. Many people lost their homes and their families, and everyone had to live on rations. They could only buy fixed amounts of many kinds of food.
In 1942, Young was pressed into the Red Army like this, along with thousands of other prisoners to fight the German army on the European Eastern Front. After a year of fighting for the Red Army, he was captured again in eastern Ukraine during the Third Battle of Kharkov. This time he was taken prisoner by the German army and pressed into fighting for the Wehrmacht. Young was sent to the Western Front as part of an Ostbattalion, or Eastern Battalion, fighting alongside fellow prisoners. He would help defend against the Allied invasion in Normandy, France, close to Utah Beach. After the D-Day landings in June 1944, with the German defense overrun, Young was captured by U.S. paratroopers, originally mistaking him to be a Japanese soldier in a German uniform. Young was sent to a prison camp in Britain, then transferred to a camp in the United States, where he stayed until the war's end.
The Second World War ended in 1945, and big changes were made by a new Labour government. Most importantly, the UK now had a national health service, so anyone who was ill could see a doctor or go to hospital without paying. The government also now gave money to help people who were ill or old or had lost their jobs. Because of the Education Act of 1944, there were also free places in schools for children up to the age of 15. Another change after the Second World War was that more women went to work. They had shown that they could do men's jobs, and many of them had done important war work. In some homes, nothing was different for women, but over the next 50 years, women in the UK slowly saw changes for themselves in education, work, and at home. Their lives would never be the same again. After the Second World War, many of the UK's colonies wanted to rule themselves. The south of Ireland had already become independent from the UK in 1921, so the country had now become the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
This is an island known by the name of Ireland, and it is divided between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is an independent country, whereas Northern Ireland along with Scotland, England and Wales form the United Kingdom. But the question is, why did Ireland get divided? To know the answer to this question, we will have to go back into history. It was 12th century when British involvement in Ireland began with the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland, and this would continue till the 20th century. England and native Irish both used to be Catholic nations, but it changed with the emergence of Protestant Reformation in the early 16th century. For those who do not know, Catholic and Protestant are two different branches of Christianity. Then in 1534, the King of England, Henry VIII, broke away from Roman Catholic Church and established Church of England, which meant nation of Ireland was going to be ruled by a Protestant king. Then in 1609, under the kingship of James I, settlement of English and Scottish Protestant population in the north of Ireland was started. This is known by the name of Ulster Plantation. That's why today as well we see Protestant majority in the Northern Ireland. We should know that under various reigns, the Irish population was heavily discriminated, and this led to an increase in Irish rebellions demanding for freedom. Then in 1800, through the Act of Union, Ireland was formally made part of the United Kingdom. After that came a major event. In the late 1840s, Ireland was severely affected by the Great Famine, or known as Irish Potato Famine. The unresponsive attitude of British government towards this famine led to the resurgence of nationalism in Ireland. As a result, the Irish Home Rule movement started in 1870 and lasted till the end of World War I. Finally, in 1921, Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed and a free Irish state with Dominion status was established. But Northern Ireland was kept out of this and still was part of the United Kingdom. The Dominion status was not liked by many. Hence, in 1937, a referendum was held and it led to Ireland becoming a fully independent state. Although much of the things were settled after this, yet a period known as troubles between 1960s and 70s was violent. The reason for this violence can be attributed to the demography of Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, a quarter of the people, mainly Catholics, consider Britain as an occupying force. These people who protest against Britain are known as Republicans or Nationalists, who strive for an independent Ireland free from British rule. The rest of the people, mostly Protestant, known as Loyalists or Unionists, want to maintain status quo. To bring stability and peace in the region, an agreement was signed between British and Irish government in 1998, known as Good Friday Agreement. This agreement led to persistence of peace in Northern Ireland. Yet with Brexit, some tensions were escalated. Now with their history in mind, let's quickly discuss the differences between both. Ireland and Northern Ireland are parts of the same island. Upper part is called Northern Ireland and the remaining is called Republic of Ireland or Ireland. So if someone says Ireland, they are probably referring to the Republic of Ireland. In terms of sovereignty, Northern Ireland is part of United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland is an independent sovereign republic. Head of the state in Northern Ireland is the monarch of United Kingdom, and in Republic of Ireland, the president is the head of the state. Type of government in Northern Ireland is constitutional monarchy, and in Republic of Ireland is parliamentary republic. Religion. Northern Ireland is predominantly Protestant and the Republic of Ireland is Catholic dominant. The Republic of Ireland is a member of European Union, but with Brexit, Northern Ireland came out of the European Union. Like the rest of the United Kingdom, the currency of Northern Ireland is pound, and in Republic of Ireland, it's euro, like all other members of the European Union.
People from the colonies had fought for the UK during the war, and they felt they had won their freedom. In 1947, India, once a very important part of the empire, became independent. In the next 20 years, most of the other colonies also did the same. They became independent, but joined the Commonwealth, an organisation of the governments of the UK's old colonies. The UK needed more workers to help rebuild the country after the war. So the government invited other Europeans and people from the colonies of the old empire to move there. Hoping to find good new jobs, many people came, mainly from Europe, India, Pakistan, and the West Indies. In 1945, there were only a few thousand non-white people in the UK, but by 1970, there were 1.4 million. Sadly, there were often problems in later years when some of the people born in the UK felt that immigrants and their families were taking too many jobs. There is some racism when people do not like others because they have a different colour skin in the UK today. But most people do not like racism and want all people in the UK to live together happily. In 1952, Elizabeth II became the new Queen of the UK, and millions of people watched her coronation on TV. The first TVs were made in the 1920s, but many English people bought TVs for the first time for the coronation. And in the 1950s, TVs started to become an important part of life in England. There were many changes in the UK in the second half of the 20th century. Many of the country's traditional industries, for example iron, cloth, coal and shipbuilding, began to have problems, and people working in those industries lost their jobs. New industries became more important, for example banking and pharmaceuticals, drugs and medicines. England today is a very different place than it was 100 years ago. Today, England is one of the most multicultural countries in the world, and many people from the West Indies, Africa, India, China, Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe live here.
Migration is a big issue today for Britain. Historians and archaeologists at the universities of Kent and Reading found that there has always been migration and that migrants have played a major role in British history. Today, you can find tombstones of migrants from 100 years ago, European refugees and soldiers who fought and died during the First World War. 800,000 Indians migrated to Europe. Almost 1 in 10 were killed, and 95,000 Chinese came to Europe for work. The war was a multicultural effort, and migration was a key element in it. High migration rates are also found in the Roman period. Using chemical analysis of the teeth from skeletons, archaeologists have identified where a person grew up. The results show that up to 30% of the population were migrants, including a wealthy woman of African descent who lived in York. History demonstrates that people have always moved. We should expect people in the future to migrate. It is what humans do.
more than 250 different languages are spoken in London. Probably because of this, there are also many religions in England. England is a Christian country, but different religions are freely followed, and there are many Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, and Buddhist people here. Society has changed in England too. 100 years ago, most people married in their early 20s or younger and then had children, but today many more people live alone, and most do not get married or have children until they are in their 30s or older. England's place in the world, as part of the UK, is also very different. The UK does not have an empire now, but it is an important country in Europe and became a member of the European Union, then called the EEC, in 1973.
After 3.5 years, Brexit is finally real and the divorce is sealed. The United Kingdom is ending its 47 years of membership with the European Union. But what kind of changes will there be after a country leaves the EU for the first time? Even though British citizens will no longer be EU citizens, the changes will be subtle at the beginning. The UK will continue to follow EU rules but will have no say in making them. This means freedom of movement of goods, people, services and capital will still apply. But the UK's 73 members of European Parliament will head back home. British citizens will still be able to work and travel in the EU and vice versa. Also, the UK will trade freely with the EU. There won't be any changes at the borders or additional mobile roaming charges. And this is all thanks to a transition period which will last for 11 months until December 31st, 2020. This period is intended to give the UK and EU time to negotiate their post-Brexit relationship. There will be a lot to negotiate, and top of the list for the UK is a trade deal which ensures a tariff and quota-free flow of goods. This is important because 49% of the UK's trade is with the EU. UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson wants British goods and services to be able to enter the EU without any tariffs or quotas. But according to the EU officials, this plan is a complete no-go, because if they agree to this, they would be giving more power to the UK than the EU members. Another hot topic is fisheries. Many fishermen from neighbouring countries are alarmed, because Brexit might exclude them from fishing in UK waters, which they have been doing for centuries. Fishermen whose households are solely dependent on this definitely would like to see a deal here. Other important negotiation issues will include security, foreign affairs, data sharing and education. EU negotiators have warned that only having 11 months to untangle these issues is unrealistic and want to extend the transition period until 2022. But Johnson seems determined not to extend it beyond the deadline, which brings us back to the no-deal Brexit situation. If the UK and the EU don't come to an agreement, the country will go back to trading under rules set by the World Trade Organization in 1995. This means most UK goods would be subject to tariffs and therefore would cost more. Also, the UK will be treated as a third country for services, losing its access to a single market, mobility rights and recognition of professional qualifications. On the other hand, the free movement of people will end starting from January 1st, 2021, whether or not there is a trade deal between the UK and the EU. Of course, there could always be a deal within the upcoming 11 months, or Johnson could change his mind and try to extend the period. But if he does so, he would need to seal a deal with the EU to extend the transition by July 1st, 2020, just 5 months from now. So the UK is out of the EU, but without a final deal on what a post-transition period looks like, are they really?
The UK works very closely with the United States of America, USA, and it also continues to be a member of the Commonwealth, together with 52 other countries from around the world. Members of the Commonwealth meet every 2 years to decide how they can best work together.